Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about the 19th century explosion of tea, different tea companies, and how they use advertising to get certain types of consumers. Now before we begin, if you haven't done so already, please visit Casey and I at the Tea Shop over in New Braunfels, Texas. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't done so already. If you appreciate our content and you want the content to come fresh to you, post a comment if you like. So this is an episode ongoing in our history of tea playlist, and we're kind of going chronologically about, previously we talked about why tea and not coffee became the preferred beverage of the British Isles. And today we're going to talk about kind of the development that happened to tea from the early 1800s to the late 1800s vis-a-vis advertising and the different companies that exploded. Now remember, the East India Company got a charter from Queen Elizabeth in 1600 and essentially, for all intents and purposes, controlled and dominated the tea market into the early 1800s. Now in the early 1800s, you did see some factors that changed. For example, the Opium War allowed to more ports to be open, but most importantly, the English government revoked the EIC's monopoly on tea. And so now anybody, in particular, you saw these companies and these ships, the cutters, the super fast ones, anyone now could get tea from China or from somewhere else and bring it to England. And so you saw this mass opportunity because there were people who definitely saw the profit of tea. And we had talked about how later in the century, like in the 1850s and certainly 1880s, how since Robert Fortune in the EIC stole the tea plant and was able to successfully plant it in India, and also they discovered the Assam variety in the 1820s, 1830s, all these things came to kind of like a headway in the 1870s to 1890s, where English tastes now were going toward black tea instead of green tea. Historically, we talked about once tea got to Europe in the mid to late 1600s, from that point to about the mid 1800s, it was green tea and black tea were the two main types. Like Hyson was a very popular green tea. You look at something like Congo, very popular black tea. But because of the ability to plant the Camellia sinensis plant in British India and in Ceylon, tea got a lot cheaper. What else happened? So in the 1850s, the British Parliament lowered the tax on tea significantly. So now this definitely opened up tea to all classes, where beforehand, certainly in the late 1600s and the 1700s, it was really for the aristocracy. And by the 1800s, now we're talking about Charles Dickens, we're talking about explosion of working class, factory workers, but also middle class and whatnot. And so now everybody loved tea because everybody in the world loves the taste of tea, and everyone can now get a hold of it because it was pretty inexpensive. And so now you see big companies come into the forefront, and some of these you can still see today. And so now you had advertising. Advertising was mammoth. Now of course you had newspapers previous to the mid to late 1800s, but now this is when advertising takes hold, because you have different department stores, you have different tea companies like Twinings, for example, and others that have this tea. They have it pretty inexpensive now, and they want to sell it, right? They want to make a profit like any other commercial enterprise. And how do you do it? Well, advertise, advertise, advertise. So everyone had kind of like a different form. So Twinings, for example, had a royal charter, and it was given a royal charter in the like Queen Victoria. So Twinings later on, and you can kind of still see it today among the tea bag world, kind of positioned itself in the 19th century as being the tea for the rich, the tea for the wealthy. Because look, if Queen Victoria and her family is drinking it, then it's good enough for you. And Queen Victoria was an avid tea drinker. And so that's how Twinings did it. Then you see other companies, Lipton. So Lipton was originally from Ceylon. So I talked about in a previous episode how Ceylon, prior really to the mid 1800s, was a coffee colony, and then there was a blight that wiped out the Arabica bean there, and so they started to grow tea, and tea was very successful. And the Lipton family came in there, and they invested a lot of money, and then quite quickly they were exceedingly wealthy. And the Lipton family positioned in a different way. To them, it was selling inexpensive tea, and this might sound familiar to today, selling inexpensive tea at dirt cheap prices to get the lower classes involved. And so they made millions upon millions of pounds sterling targeting this way. And then you had a variety of other people. I mean, there's a lot of these companies don't even exist anymore, but I only wanted to mention these two because these two are still quite influential in the world. So you had various department stores, you had various other tea companies marketing in different regions of England as well. Some were more in Liverpool, some were in Manchester, some were in Scotland, some were in Ireland, some were in London, some were in different parts of London. And the same thing happened over in America, where you had different advertising that was catering to different types of people to get people to buy this tea that now they had at a pretty inexpensive price, because now you're looking at the 1880s, you're looking at the Suez Canal being opened. So the time to go from India and Ceylon, which were now the big tea producers, because China was no longer the big tea producer because they stole the tea plant, it was infinitely cheaper to get it from Ceylon and India. So the Suez Canal cut the time from Ceylon and India to England. The tax is exceedingly low now, and there's a mass market of people, not just in England, but all over the British Isles, the Commonwealth, as we later called it. So America, Australia, New Zealand, all these places. And so now you see the mass propaganda, the mass commercialization, getting this tea out to all parts of the world. So next episode, eventually we're going to talk about why tea and coffee, both rivaling in terms of pounds consumed in America around 1900, why did America, unlike England, become more of a coffee drinking country within the next 60, 70 years? Guys, I'd love to hear from you. Do you drink Lipton? Do you like Twining? I'd love to hear from you. Post in the comments. Until next time, take care and God bless.